Traditionally, the concept of superheroes has always been limited to morally strict individuals who simply do right things because it is the right thing to do. Recently, a new type of hero has emerged: the anti-hero. The typical anti-hero is perceived as a villain, but by the end of the film, viewers understand that these characters are actually on a strange middle ground between hero and villain. Given that Marvel Studios has become such a big player in the entertainment industry, it's time to take a real look at anti-heroes and see if they are the future of Hollywood movies. Where do we begin? The most successful television series of the last decade, from Breaking Bad starting in 2008, Game of Thrones starting in 2010, and House of Cards starting in 2012, all have a common denominator: dark, complex protagonists who aren't great guys, often referred to as anti-heroes. These characters give viewers the opportunity to explore the limits of human behavior and test the boundaries of what is acceptable. They signal a shift in television culture. As a medium that once focused on family-friendly content, anti-heroes and the large-scale serial stories they tell help blur the lines between television and film, allowing for richer, more complex material. The demands on television content have increased, and it has become apparent that the good guys simply aren't interesting enough to fill the need. The concept of the imperfect hero isn't new. Hundreds of years ago, Shakespeare wrote about Hamlet and Lady Macbeth, two rather unfortunate stars of their own story. In 1950, J.D. Salinger's Holden Caulfield was a voice of an entire generation of Americans. Where are they now? Television picked up the idea of the anti-hero as early as the 1970s. Archie Bunker wasn't a great guy. But it wasn't until the combined success of Tony Soprano, Dexter Morgan, and Walter White that things really took off. So, they've been around for a long time, and they're some of the best written characters in the entire industry. Not just as superheroes and stuff, but as real, imperfect people who want to do something good, do it in a bad way. We can always identify with something like that. These characters have managed to push the cultural envelope so much that every network with anti-heroes has jumped on the bandwagon to keep up. Does this trend suggest that the rising popularity of the villainous star is due to, in part, the television's tendency to repeat something that works until it doesn't? To some degree, that may be the case, but writers now have the opportunity to create flawed and intriguing characters that appeal to people's fears, disillusionments, and inner turmoil, and offer a higher form of escapism. These characters may not always be great people or even sympathetic, but they inevitably behave in ways that normal, socially acceptable people would want them to. Anti-heroes fight and live outside the rules, and they stretch our morals boundaries. The hackneyed fairy tale image of a good defeating evil isn't realistic and simply no longer interests us. In the post-Tony, post-Dexter, post-Walter White world, the major television series have more anti-heroes than heroes. Think Frank Underhill or Kevin Spacey in House of Cards, Richie Finestra or Bobby Cavanaugh in Vinyl 2016, everyone in Boardwalk Empire from 2010 to 2014, Norman Bates, Freddie Highmore, and Norman Bates, Vera Farmiga in Bates Motel 2013. Most of the characters in American Horror Story 2011, Raymond Reddington, James Spader in The Blacklist 2013, Hannibal Lecter, Mads Mikkelsen in Hannibal 2013 to 2015, Don Draper, John Hamm in Mad Men 2007 to 2015, Jimmy McGill, Bob Odenkirk in Better Call Saul 2015, and the list goes on. The best stories are the ones that challenge and provoke us, and a main character who embodies these qualities is the best way to achieve that provocation. Anti-heroes allow us to explore a part of our psyche that wants to give everyone the middle finger to the face without actually doing it. They let us see how someone dances around their morals and beliefs as we don't have to do it ourselves. Anti-heroes also offer the promise of redemption. In the first season of Breaking Bad, we could understand the motivations behind Walter's actions. We rooted for him as he acted on behalf of his soon-to-be widowed wife, disabled son, and young daughter, rebelling against a broken healthcare system that sends its users into poverty. His redemption never comes. Instead, it passes to Jesse, who leaves the series as the only character to retain humanity and promise after Walter degenerates into a villain. Breaking Bad was nominated for over 100 awards, won a number of Golden Globes and Emmys, as well as a Peabody Award, and reinforced the notion that an audience's thirst for this kind of deconstruction of good through its main characters. House of Cards creator Beau Willimon told the LA Times, "I don't care about sympathy. Storytelling is an exploration. It's not about making statements. We don't have a statement. The show doesn't have any agenda. Basically, good people are just not as interesting as bad people. Most people we know in real life are good, simple people. It's worth writing stories about the flawed people who are fraught with inner conflicts and ideological dilemma. Weaknesses also open up the character to change in all directions, and change is interesting. The success of television is based on our need for change and conflict that captures our attention. People have been watching Jeopardy since 1964 because the questions change every day. So should it be with an interesting character. Perhaps the most important truth about these types of characters is the looming reality that danger and evil can prevail over them. Walter White was swallowed up by his greed and power. Dexter Morgan slipped from the code over the seasons. Frank Underwood is the guy who pushes people in front of the subway when he thinks they know too much. And in Game of Thrones, the noblest house in Westeros, the Starks, sees almost nothing but destruction. The test of how far characters can fall keeps us hooked. The Artifice writes, perhaps the most important factor is that these series don't underestimate us as an audience. We can tell real life from fantasy. We appreciate hard-hitting and shocking stories, and we don't need a network to decide for us if something is too hard to grasp. It's almost as if these villainous protagonists are a symbol of rebellion for the bored audience. They're an impetus for changing the way we're told stories and the way to think about characters in general. It'd be easy to hate Walter White as his naked quest for power, but through compelling, interesting storytelling, our enjoyment of his megalomania grows. In other words, TV audiences are fed up with a knight in shining armor story. And for a time, many anti-heroes exist in a world where other villains are even worse than they are. Sure, Dexter was a murderous, psychotic maniac, but somehow John Lithgow's character Trinity seemed even worse. Walter White may have begun his descent into pure villainy while working on his multi-million-dollar commercial meth lab, but Gus Fring, Giancarlo Esposito, didn't have our initial support behind him. This juxtaposition, coupled with the fact that we know more about our anti-hero than we do about his nemesis, allows us to sympathize with him. All in all, the anti-hero seems to be a perennial favorite. Until television regresses and becomes simpler, audiences will continue to crave the complicated, dark, inviting appeal of stories about people with questionable morals. And what do you think about heroes? Should they always be better than everybody with great morals, or should they be more like Walter White or The Boys? And of course, if you know more, feel free to let us know in the comments.